Okay, this is the first in a series of really quick videos that are going to go over kind of tips and tricks for beginning knitters, or maybe even intermediate knitters who haven't learned these particular tricks and stuff yet. Thing one today, I want to talk about substituting yarn in a pattern. Say you have a pattern. Say you have a pattern that calls for bulky weight wool. Say it's a scarf pattern. You don't have bulky weight wool, or you can't find bulky weight wool, or you can't find bulky weight wool that you like. All entirely possible. Trick number one, if you can't find a bulky weight wool that you want to use, but you still want to end up with a gauge similar to bulky weight, use 2 strands of worsted weight. A little trick for that. A lot of times little neck warmers and scarflets and a lot of bulky weight projects don't call for a whole lot of bulky weight. Usually it's just a couple hundred yards. So if you, say, bought a hank of Cascade 220 and you wanted to double it to make a bulky weight, you would end up with roughly 110 yards halved, because we're having the hank here. So if the hank is 220 yards single-stranded, if you're going to double-strand it, it's going to be 110. If you only need 100 yards of something to make the pattern, you can use the same hank, and you take from the inside and the outside of the ball, like so. You ball the hank into a cake, a center pull cake, just like you normally would to knit with. You pull one strand from the center and one strand from the outside edge, and you hold them together, and together they will make a bulky weight yarn. So that is what I did when I wrote the Verge neck warmer pattern, which is this. And that's actually what the pattern calls for, is 2 strands of Cascade 220 held together, because it's something that so many people can get a hold of, and it's a lot easier to find than bulky weight wool. Or you can use a single strand of bulky weight. So say you don't want to use a bulky weight, you want a finer weight piece. Or that's all you happen to have, you don't have enough to double it, whatever. So you want to change the gauge of the garment. This particular neck warmer calls for a gauge of 3 stitches to the inch on a certain size needle. So now, as long as you could get 3 stitches to the inch on whatever size needle with whatever size yarn, you can follow the directions exactly. So use whatever yarn and whatever needle you need to do. If it's a bulkier weight yarn on a smaller needle or whatever, do that to get the gauge. Now, if you just want to change the gauge altogether, you're going to change your yarn and you're going to change your needle size. Now, this is a little more complicated, and for something like a sweater or a shawl or any sort of like fitted garment or anything that requires a certain amount of yarn, you're going to want to stay as close to gauge as possible, because otherwise it's going to screw with everything else in your pattern. It's going to mess with your numbers, it's going to mess with the end result that you get, and it's going to mess with how much yarn that you're using. And a lot of times patterns for larger items will tell you exactly how much yarn you need, so you don't end up buying a whole bunch. So say you want to change the gauge of your entire pattern. Say you have just worsted weight yarn and US 9 needles, and you want to make the project out of that. What you can do is you're going to want to figure out your gauge. So say you're getting 6 stitches to the inch with worsted weight wool on US 9s, and the gauge calls for 3 stitches to the inch. Now, if you're getting 6 and you're supposed to have 3, you're going to double the amount that you're going to cast on for most things, unless you need a very specific number. For this particular pattern, it calls for a certain number because that's what you need to work the cable. Now, you can still work the cable with the numbers given. It's going to be a little narrower. So you'll just work it for longer to make up your length in your row gauge. But then you'll want to cast on more for the rest of it. Or say you were working just something straight, a straight piece, you could just add stitches on. Anything to compensate for that gauge. So that's pretty much how you figure it out. It takes a little tiny bit of math. For items like scarves and neck warmers and even hats, it's very easy to do that. If you need help doing that, as always, I am here, I am online, I am checking my email, and I am on the Twitter. So you can always find me. Find me at www.danido.com, DANIDO.com, or on Twitter at Dani Do Crafty. And I'm actually answering a lot of questions these days on Twitter for yarn and knitting questions. So find me there or send me an email through my website, and I will do my best to help you out and to help you figure out gauge. I strongly recommend going and buying that Verge neck warmer. It's a great last minute gift. Until next time, have a great day. Happy knitting.